third episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to the third episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Not the third episode ever, but the third today, just so everyone is clear on that. And we are diving back into a story that I am really intrigued by. And this, of course, is the story of Sheriff Mickey Stines in Letcher County, Kentucky. And he, on camera, shot and killed Judge Kevin Mullins, who he was once a bailiff for. Now he's still an accused killer, an alleged killer. He has not been convicted in court, but it is unique because you see him firing 8 shots into the judge. And the question still remains, but we're starting to get filling in the blank a little bit. But the big question was, why? These guys were friends. What happened? At first, there was speculation maybe the sheriff's daughter, who was a minor, was involved. That seems to not be the case. And then we hear about Deputy Ben Fields, who ended up being convicted for essaying women in the judge's chamber. And things started to take definitely a bizarre turn. And now we have and Elizabeth Jones, who is, by the way, the host of Hillbilly Crime, one of our 3 best guests. She has had the deposition from Sheriff Mickey Stines for a little bit of time and has had it on her channel, including the reading of it. And it's long. It's like 198 pages. And the COE is going to be loading in some graphics for us that we're going to kind of go through to discuss this deposition. The other 2 guests, real quickly, John Tompkins, coming to us right now from the great state of New Jersey, my home state. And he is a criminal defense attorney in Indianapolis, Indiana, and was with us for the Delphi case and hopefully with us for many more cases. I wish there weren't many more cases, but there always seems to be many more cases. And of course, last but not least, the General, Mark Davidson, District Attorney General for 5 rural counties in Tennessee, an active attorney general. And I told him that I was a district attorney. I'm sorry. I told him that I was district attorney general. It's tough to get it right. But I told Mark that I've been reading so many motions and depositions lately that I need to be made an honorary district attorney general. So I'm hoping that day comes, and I will, whatever you wear for that, I will gladly wear it. So without further ado, I know I'm going to end up calling her Hillbilly, and then I'm going to get hate mail that it's an offensive term, but Elizabeth says it's fine, and Hillbilly crime is too much, so I like Hillbilly, but I'm going to call her Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you've been following this case closer than anyone. I mean, this is a really wild, crazy case in a very small town, I think of 2,000 people, the population in Whitesburg, Kentucky. What is the mood there now? I mean, are people still talking about this? I mean, it's a small place. So if you go to the drugstore or the grocery store, is it still a topic of discussion?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I get a lot more talk one-on-one. A lot of times, people are just still scared to speak out where others can hear them. So I get a lot of the one-on-ones.
Yeah. And so Mickey Stines, who's this guy, he gave a deposition 3 days before the murder. And, he is speaking sworn testimony, and it's being recorded, and there is a transcript. The others had been released. Do we know what was holding up Sheriff Mickey Stines and why it just came out sort of relatively recently? And by recently, I think in the last few days, correct?
I'm not sure why they weren't out, but they are, from what I understand, they're public record now. So,
so Buttercup, I sort of went through it, but since I like you, I'm going to go through it again real quick. The guy on the right is Sheriff Mickey Stines. The guy on the left is Judge Kevin Mullins. Mickey Stines, 43 years old, even though he looks a tad older than that. Kevin Mullins, 54, the judge. I always point this out because it's wild to me. He's smoking in his chamber, which apparently they do in Letcher County, Kentucky. And right after this photo, these are the last minutes of the judge's life. Sheriff Mickey Stines takes out a firearm and puts 8 bullets into the judge, killing him. And it's all caught on video, which we don't show because it's gruesome. And then the question, of course, became why. So, General, to you, this deposition became public. I don't know if you had a chance to read the entire thing or even glance at it, but assuming you did, I'm hoping maybe, what stood out to you or what is standing out to you now about this case in general?
I must apologize. I've not had a chance to read that lengthy deposition yet. I have it available to refer to if I need to. Yeah. Kind of from the outset of this case, you already mentioned that we initially heard that there might have been some issue with the sheriff's daughter. We haven't really heard much more about that. That's not seemed to have fleshed itself out in any way as this case has moved along. I've always kind of taken the position, well, early on I did. I didn't really see that the civil lawsuit would be a motivation for the sheriff to murder the judge. And part of the reason I say that is that as an elected public official myself, and knowing many sheriffs, it's not unusual to get sued. We deal with that all the time. I've got a few pending now where I have the state attorney general representing me. So that kind of comes with the territory. Now, this one was different. I have to acknowledge that because it really was pointing a finger at the sheriff saying you failed to supervise your employees who were engaged in really bad stuff. Not just generally, but not in the courthouse, and not just in the courthouse, but in the judge's chambers. So that's something weird and different and a bit unusual about this lawsuit versus what I'm normally used to seeing in our line of work.
That's Mark freezing up, I hope, and not me. Better Mark than me. But Mark, you're back now. You're back.
Issues.
Oh, the technology is not going to play along today. I'm just going to bounce Mark out for a second. The COE is also asking, and I know it's tough for you, John and Elizabeth, if you can mute yourselves when not speaking, because we're getting a little bit of an audio hiss. But John, I am coming to you. And I don't know, Mark's back. I'm going to bring him in here.
Yeah, I'm back.
Mark, you hearing us?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Not your problem. Not your fault. So John, to you, again, I don't know. You guys are busy attorneys. I mean, John's in Jersey for the day on business, but I don't know if you read the deposition, but you kind of are aware of what's been happening. What, if anything, is sort of standing out or sticking out to you at this point about this particular case, which is somewhat mysterious?
Well, I've read excerpts of the deposition, not the entire thing, and I would sort of dovetail with it is not unusual for a sheriff to be sued or named in a lawsuit, because when you sue the sheriff's department, you usually list the name of the sheriff. So there are a lot where there's no personal involvement of the sheriff, but because he's the sheriff, he's in the caption. This appears to be more than that. Based on the deposition, it appears the plaintiff in this suit is claiming personal knowledge. I didn't see anything in the excerpts that I read about personal participation, but personal knowledge of the activities that were going on in the judge's chambers, the assaults that were going on. And so more than just negligent entrustment or negligent supervision, that's another tort that isn't an active participant or doesn't require actual knowledge, but callous disregard, reckless disregard, that kind of thing. This goes farther than that from what I saw. It is saying that he did know. And then you throw in this case, the deputy who was convicted of the sexual assault in the judge's chambers was his successor as the bailiff to this very judge, which makes you wonder if the next step in that, or if, this deputy who was convicted got a pretty lenient sentence, that we'll see what the investigation is. That may have been a way to keep him quiet. He may have inherited the situation of being able to do certain things in the judge's chambers while the judge looked the other way. And I just get the gut feeling that this shooting is going to end up related to those activities and the sheriff's actual knowledge of those activities, which may be why we didn't see the deposition for a while. If the investigators asked that it be held confidential while they investigated to see if there were leads in it, that would make sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And from BMB Fallen Angel, if his daughter, meaning Sheriff Mickey Stines, wasn't involved with the judge, then maybe the sheriff was worried about oncoming trials. Sure seems like they were doing SA in the judge's quarters. By the way, shout out to Nick. Love the super chat. He is Abby Tahaha's husband, friend of the show, friend of ours, and shout out to your wife. But Elizabeth, to you, a picture is coming into focus. And again, we're just waiting on some graphics, which I think the COE might be having a little bit of an issue, but I have the depo and for at least the main points of the depo, which I did read today in front of me. But Elizabeth, to you, a picture is sort of coming into focus. And that picture in part is that we know this guy, Ben Fields, who is a deputy sheriff under Mickey Stines, was convicted for SAing women literally in the judge's chambers. And here we go, Vanceburg, Kentucky. Welcome in, Kentucky. Love having you here. And apologies in advance if I call Elizabeth Hillbilly and you get mad at me. I don't mean it on purpose. I see a lot of hillbilly crime and love having other creators here as well. But so this guy, Ben Fields, he's not a good character, and he's working within the sheriff's office, and Sheriff Mickey Stines is his direct supervisor. And it seems like this guy was just doing whatever he wanted. And by the way, he was required to submit written approval for outside employment and resubmit annually, which apparently didn't happen. This is part of the deposition in regard to Deputy Ben Fields. It says, and they're asking Mickey Stines, what did you think of him at that time? Mickey says, nice guy, polite, professional, always at work, just an all-around good guy from what I know, who happened to be essaying women in the judge's chambers. He didn't say that. Were those the reasons why to hire him for the bailiff position? Yes, he was dependable. So we're sort of getting into it here, Elizabeth, but we're going to quickly find out that there was ineptness at play and things much more sinister. So, I mean, overall, there's Ben Fields, but overall, before we get to this, what stood out to you the most about this deposition, Elizabeth?
What stood out to me the most was that it was revealed that when Mickey sent Ben for his polygraph to be hired as a deputy, apparently all you have to do is just admit to your stuff, your misconduct and your crimes, and you become suitable for hire. Ben admitted in his polygraph that he drank alcohol on the job while he was working at the jail. He also admitted that him and his wife, who was a sergeant at the jail, were having sex on duty.
Hold on, say that one. Repeat that. That was his wife. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, him and his wife both worked at the jail. She was a sergeant.
Okay.
And so he admitted in his polygraph that he was having sexual activity while on duty at the jail.
I wonder if the wife knew that he was also having it with other women. But go ahead, Elizabeth. Right. She knows now.
That seems like an awful big loophole, right? So Mickey gets the polygraph report back, and it says that he's suitable for hire. Who is doing these polygraphs? And why would Mickey said in the deposition that he's seen them before where they were not suitable for hire. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so if they're not suitable for hire, they were caught in a lie is kind of what I'm putting together. But if they admitted it and they didn't lie, then apparently they passed their polygraph and they're suitable for hire. So the attorney asked him if he saw these things, and he says, no, I didn't look at the questions and the answers. I just looked at the cover page. It said he was suitable for hire, so I hired him.
Yeah. Look at this. Ryan Adams coming to us from the epicenter, Whitesburg, Kentucky. Ryan, our email, if you want to, join in and give us your take, since you live there and it's a very small community, it is survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. But this is more of that deposition, and John and Mark, you're hearing some stories about Ben Fields that are disturbing at the very least, criminal at the worst. But it says here, the question is from the attorney to Mickey Stines. I understand that, but that is not my question. My question is, had you known that he had consumed alcoholic beverages while at work and engaged in sexual contact during work hours of the detention center, would you have considered those red flags in hiring Ben Fields? That is my question. So he's trying to put Sheriff Mickey Stines back on track. And of course, Mickey Stines now getting some heat from lawyers for allowing this. And he says, yeah, I would not condone that type of activity on the job. But your testimony is that you weren't aware of that. Is that correct until today? No, absolutely not. General Mark, is he saying that he was aware of it? I'm confused here. Are you saying that it's because there are a lot of double negatives? Is he saying that he wasn't aware of it? Elizabeth, how do you read this? That he's not aware of it, or he was aware of it?
I think that he is trying to say that he was not aware of it. I think if you go a little bit further in the deposition, it says this day that he was actually doing the deposition wasn't the first day. I think he says later on that it was when he listened to Ben's deposition, or when he listened to something that Ben had done previous, or just maybe a few days before that, with his attorney preparing for this deposition. That was kind of how I took that.
Abby Tahaha. Now look at this. The couple is weighing in. I love it. Watching the Ellen Greenberg show from earlier. Yeah, Joel, I felt like a kid in the back seat while mommy and daddy argued. No politics. Thank you, Abby. That story, for those who do not know, Google Ellen Greenberg. It's finally getting traction after 14 years. The very short of it is that she was stabbed 20 times, 2 after she was dead, or at least 1 after she was dead, and it was ruled self-unaliving. And almost everyone, including now the original medical examiner who switched it from a homicide to a self-unaliving, he himself came out and said it is not a self-unaliving. For those asking why I'm saying self-unaliving, it's because you can't use the S word on YouTube. But Scorpio Girl, thank you so much. Please do hit the like button. Okay, so General Mark, I guess your take on this bit of the deposition, and it's sort of like guilty by association here. He's, in charge of this deputy Ben Fields. This guy's drinking on the job, having sex with his wife, and obviously we learn other women in the judge's chambers. Do you feel here that this heat is now starting to build layer upon layer on Sheriff Mickey Stines?
Well, it kind of looks like it. I mean, he's clearly saying in the deposition that he was not aware of that behavior. He didn't bother to look through the polygraph report to examine the questions and the answers. He just took it at face value, and it said apparently that he had not lied or shown indications of deception, and therefore was suitable because I guess he confessed to his misdeeds to the polygraph examiner. I agree with Elizabeth that that's concerning. And the sheriff ought to be looking through the polygraph. So John may know better than I do if that starts to get him into some negligent territory there. But, let's assume that it does. Let's assume that the sheriff is in danger here. He's in some jeopardy civilly because he's admitting that I didn't even bother looking at this report, which would have uncovered this problematic employee's behavior. What's the end game here? Damages. The county's going to have insurance. This is early in the lawsuit. It's a civil case. The sheriff is elected. They can't, theoretically, ouster could be down the road if he's found to really be super negligent, I guess, and the county gets hammered with damages.
What about if he's actually complicit in this behavior, which it seems
in my mind, you almost have to get there to make it worthwhile to the sheriff to go murder the judge and risk life in prison or the death penalty versus the outcome of this civil lawsuit. I'm still having a hard time balancing that equation out, where I can see the sheriff saying, yeah, this is getting so bad, I need to go kill the judge, my lifelong friend and close colleague. And I'm sure John maybe can speak to that better than I can, but looking at the criminal side of this, I'm having a hard time making the connection there on the motivation here.
Yeah. By the way, Joanna also coming to us from Whitesburg, Kentucky. Cute pup you got there. If you live, I'll make it simple. If you live in the Whitesburg, Kentucky area, please, and you want to talk about this or you have thoughts, the platform's open either for you to be on or just to talk to me. It is survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. From Violet here, Ben Fields was convicted of second-degree sodomy, third-degree R, along with witness tampering and perjury. 6 month sentence that he got to serve in his own house. That is county jail. Again, he go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, that raises an interesting question. The guy that actually committed the offenses got a slap on the wrist. So what is the sheriff worried about if he's complicit?
That's interesting. But back to that, Elizabeth, I know you mentioned it last time, but why was it so short? Why did he get out so quickly?
Well, he took a plea bargain. I think a lot of us feel like the Attorney General's office really dropped the ball on this whole thing, because the Attorney General's office is the one that was responsible for this investigation, the criminal investigation into Ben Fields. And there have been allegations towards other higher ups and, other people being complicit in this behavior. But it almost seems like once they got a guilty plea from Ben, they didn't investigate nothing else. And I'll tell you something else that stuck out to me in that deposition is that Mickey says as soon as he heard the first complaint about Ben from the reporter, some reporter had called him on the phone and asked him about it. And he said that was the first time that he knew about it. So he called the state police and asked them to come in and investigate. And he said that the state police declined to investigate because he said they were too close to them. Why is the state police investigating Mickey shooting the judge then? If they were too close to investigate Ben and his sexual misconduct and crimes in the sheriff's department, why are they all of a sudden not too close to investigate this murder?
Interesting and a good point. Louis C. here, back to John. No one has mentioned Ben Fields was a Letcher County constable before Stines hired him. And this is why we were talking about the background check here being important, but it sounds like it was a pattern of behavior. But John, to you, just getting back to that previous part of the deposition here, and then we have another graphic to go through. The lawyer leaning on him here pretty heavily, and the sheriff basically putting his hands in the air going, no, I wouldn't condone that type of activity on the job. Do you think that during the process of this deposition, and I saw a comment like this in the chat, that Mickey Stines himself was starting, like we're doing, to put together this sort of holistic picture, and was feeling like he was going to get maybe dragged down or dragged into it, possibly part of it. And that's where he's like, it's just too much for me. Because to Mark's point, it would have to be something more than just kind of a reprimand about a deputy. I mean, albeit a serious one, but it have to be more than just that. And more than this guy serving a 6-month sentence for Sheriff Mickey Stines to freak out, for lack of a better term, in the way he did and end the judge's life. So your take on this, your thoughts, was it the deposition that helped him kind of along on this path to realizing he had to take out the judge?
Well, I think the deposition probably did start just putting stark reality. I mean, the form of the questions. If you look at the deposition, one way to grade a deposition is just read the questions and not the answers. And you can see what the theory of the case is and what the attorney is trying to establish. And Mark makes a great point. I mean, but it's also a point where you're trying to explain an irrational act through rational analysis. I have had clients who have literally gotten to a point where they thought that the person that they had created, the life that they had invested themselves in being, was gone, and so their life was already over. And so they just came to a point where they felt they had nothing to lose and no one to talk to back them off or back them down. And another thing, it's not idle curiosity, but we've got a video of this shooting. How long were those cameras in this chambers that we now know sexual assaults were going on in? And I've seen a report that the woman who was assaulted reports she was forced to watch videos of other assaults.
Yeah.
So
Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the cameras went in after the whole thing went down with Deputy Ben Fields. Is that right?
Yeah, the camera in judge's chambers was placed there after Ben took the plea bargain and was convicted. I think it was DOJ or one of those who came in and put it in.
Yeah. So Louis C., 3 Kentucky State Police troopers from that post work with Stines at the sheriff's office. And now pieces are coming out here. They know what was going on. That's why they recused themselves. General Mark, assuming that this is correct and true information here, from a legal standpoint, what do they do with these 3 troopers that probably know exactly what happened and why this ended up the way that it did? I mean, do they need to depose these people? What happens with these state troopers? Oh, you're muted, Mark. I'm sorry. I think you have to undo that on your end.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I got you. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not a civil lawyer, but I would assume those troopers would be deposed if there's some indication that they may have knowledge relevant to the civil lawsuit and could be additional witnesses against what, to testify about what Ben Fields did and what they knew about it and whether or not the sheriff was aware. Kind of getting back to John's point about, and I get it, clients do crazy things. We deal with that all the time, and sometimes it's hard to understand irrational behavior. But we're talking about an elected sheriff here, a law enforcement officer with a lengthy career. You would assume somebody who's pretty accustomed to dealing with very difficult things, very tough crime scenes, tough personnel issues. That's not an easy job. And so I find it, unless he had some kind of mental breakdown, I find it hard to believe that he would be terribly fazed by this civil lawsuit to the point where he would engage in a murder on camera when he knew that there was a camera in the judge's chambers. Yeah. He's the sheriff and he runs the building and he's in charge of that building and he's in charge of security. He knows it's going to be on film.
Yeah. And by the way, we're going to get to it, but there is a part of the deposition where the attorneys for Sheriff Mickey Stines make it known that he suffers from some sort of illness that could potentially affect the brain. And that's an interesting part of the deposition. So we'll see. And I don't know, what was the reason for that. We can get to Elizabeth on that in a minute. But here is back to John. This is another very interesting point. It turns out Sheriff Mickey Stines, who's running this jurisdiction, from a law enforcement standpoint, never had training. He went to the academy, Mr. Shaw says, but not, let me explain his academy training. And then another lawyer says, let him testify for himself. So the deputy sheriff, he says, has an academy that is 20 weeks long. court security officers have an academy that is 2 weeks, and you have different types of training for both. So when I was initially hired for Stephen Banks, who's Stephen Banks, by the way?
He was
Elizabeth?
the sheriff 2 sheriffs ago.
2 sheriffs ago. Okay. So when I was initially hired for Stephen Banks, they put me through pre-pops, and I was about to work the road and work the court and stuff. Okay. So you did both the deputy training and the CSO training. And he says, I have never attended the academy. That is what you first asked when I was first. You've got a year to attend. So, John, the title of this thumbnail, because it's becoming more apparent that it is lawless in Letcher County, is lawless in Letcher County. That's the title. And now you're finding out about a sheriff who's supposed to be the top law enforcement official in Letcher County. And the guy never went to the academy, never had training. He only had court training, which is 2 weeks.
No, he didn't even have that. The only thing he had was the pre-pops, which is the fitness test. He ended up being grandfathered in for the court because he had been working there so long. So he didn't have any of the academy training. And
by the way, I don't want to body shame, but it is important here because you just heard Elizabeth say that he had to take the fitness test. He was, I think, 400 pounds or close to it, right, Elizabeth, at the time?
He was really heavy. He's in this picture here. He's lost. He had lost a lot of weight since he's been sheriff. But they said he played football when he was young, and he used to be pretty fit before he gained a lot of weight. So I don't know what year that was that he took the pre-pops. It sounds like it was when he was like 20 years old or something. So that he might would have passed it back then.
That's a good point. Good point. Age does take a toll on the body. John Tompkins, what about this, that now it's being revealed in the deposition? This guy never had proper training to be a sheriff. He was literally a guy in uniform wearing a badge who, I don't even know how he learned to shoot. I mean, maybe, he learned on his own or from his father, who knows? But what's your take on this part, this aspect of the deposition?
Well, it's highly unusual for a deputy to not have proper training. Now, I understand, and we run in occasionally to a reserve deputy or an auxiliary deputy who has gone through the pre-training but has not been sent to the academy, and he doesn't have arrest authority, but he's out on road patrol. And that's a huge administrative error by the sheriffs in Indiana, and it makes an invalid arrest. So it's not something that would not come up if he was actually out on the road. Now, they tucked him away in a couple of jobs where he didn't need the law enforcement on the road training because he was in a bailiff's position, for instance. And then once you're elected, anyone can run for sheriff. You do not have to be a trained law enforcement officer or have experience as a law enforcement officer to run for sheriff in any county, anywhere. Now, most do, just because that's the career track they've chosen. They're law enforcement for their career, and so they have all that. But not every sheriff, and not every sheriff for that matter. We occasionally have a judge in Indiana, and the last one that we had retired about 10 years ago didn't go to law school because she had been a legal secretary and she ran for judge, and she was in a small county and everyone knew her. She was more than competent.
Wow.
And she did a very good job, but I will say she received extensive training from the Supreme Court that all judicial officers get. So I don't understand how he could last that long, even tucked away in places to avoid the formal need for the training and have an excuse to not go do it at some point.
Yeah. By the way, the people of Letcher County and Whitesburg, if I may say, I am positive, are really good, hardworking people. They don't deserve this, this level of what appears to be corruption. And Mark, back to you. Great question. And then we'll get to this next part of the deposition. The cops watch the public in Letcher, but who watches these cops? Now, it should be people like John Tompkins, criminal defense attorneys, should be the protectors. But here, and I'm not going to get into names tonight, but there are allegations even against criminal defense attorneys in town. And Moon Goddess says it best, this level of corruption is insane. I mean, I would have to agree. It sounds quite lawless. General Mark, what about that this guy doesn't even go to the academy, and he's running, the whole community's law enforcement? You heard John just say that there was a judge that wasn't an attorney, but what does this say about corruption in small towns to you?
Well, Sheriff Stines would not be a sheriff in Tennessee. You cannot run for sheriff in Tennessee without being post certified, which means you've been to the academy and you receive annual training. And so you have to be a post certified law enforcement officer to run for judge. Sheriff. You can't just decide to run for sheriff. No, apparently that's concerning that that's not the case in Kentucky, because that would invite this kind of lax supervision and oversight. I would think. I would add, you can't be a judge in Tennessee anymore without being a lawyer. We had that 30 years ago, but that's gone too. So you got to.
However, Mark, this is more reason for you to make me an honorary district attorney general.
Right.
I don't need a law degree.
Yeah, your badge will be plastic, not metal. Yeah. But
I'll take it.
So yeah, that's all very concerning. I'm extremely concerned to hear that a sheriff could be a sheriff in Kentucky without any training whatsoever. And when you ask the question, well, the cops watch the public, who watches the cops? That's a good question, but we have quite a few kind of safeguards in place. In Tennessee, we've prosecuted law enforcement for, I've done it. We have laws in place that address official misconduct, official oppression. There's the Kentucky State Police in Kentucky. We have the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. If we need to call them in to investigate allegations of misconduct, we'll do that. You have the media, although in Letcher County, that's going to be small, but there's media there. Mm-hmm. You have people like Elizabeth keeping an eye on things. You have defense lawyers who are likely to report things. And typically you have a sheriff's association and a commission in the state that handles whether or not you can be a law enforcement officer. So there are things in place to address misconduct, and civil lawsuits obviously are one of them, in addition to criminal charges.
Yeah. And so things get even, more salacious. This has to do with Elizabeth, and I'll have you explain it after I go through it. Graphic images being circulated among the deputies and possibly judges. We don't know. But the question is, do you know why you sent that image to your deputies? Answer: for blowing off a little steam, picking on each other. How are you picking on them in this picture? Lawyer jumps in, continuing objection to relevance. Go ahead. We are just aggravating each other. So Elizabeth, you've read this much more closely than the three of us. What was happening here? I believe these were memes and other things being circulated on Facebook and possibly other social media. Do we know any of the details of what was being sent back and forth?
Well, they were in private message groups, like a messenger with Mickey and say two of the other deputies. And they were putting memes together and adding each other's faces on, funny, what they thought was funny, childish, but it ends up vulgar, vulgar pictures. I do want to point out one thing that before you went on to this. One of the biggest things that struck me with the training aspect of it all was, if you look deeper into that deposition, they go into the policies. A department has to have policies for a reason. You have a policy against sexual misconduct. You have a policy against sexual harassment. You have policies about secondary employment. There are certain policies that a department has in place for a reason. So that they, in this deposition, she opens up the policy manual and she reads off all these policies to him that he didn't have any. It sounded to me like he had absolutely no knowledge of any of that. He didn't have any thing in place for people to come in and make complaints. And you also have to remember the Good Old Boys Club, which is what we're talking about here, didn't just have Ben in it by himself. You know, he's not in this Good Old Boys Club by himself.
Yeah.
So there's more players in this circle, and they all are in that same aspect of it. The county attorney, he went to the county attorney to ask advice about the termination letter for Ben Fields. So the county attorney redid it, as what I took from it, and gave him the one that he wanted him to give Ben. So there was a couple different versions of his termination letter. And so there were and it also sounds to me like Mickey just really wasn't very knowledgeable or educated on a lot of these things. And so he relied on these other people around him, whether it be, and then you also have this main defense attorney who is at this deposition with him, hearing everything he's saying and everything he's not saying. And then, so he knows this information.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just a whole lot in here.
Yeah, these are great points. It's like putting a puzzle together. But Kim McKinney, I'm going to go back to Elizabeth and then John. But from Kim McKinney, could the questions in the deposition make the sheriff think that the judge was pinning it on him? Elizabeth, there's no easy way for me to ask you this, but I have to ask. Do people think that the judge was partaking in these activities within the chamber?
There have been rumors about the judge's chambers for years and years and years, but you've never had anybody. Well, I can't say that. I can't say that nobody's come forward before. I'm just glad that Ned Pillersdorf actually took this seriously and tried to push it forward. If he had not done that, we'd still not know anything. Everybody would just keep continuing to move along as they always have. And I also think that the previous sheriffs kind of set Mickey up for failure, because there have been a whole long mess of the way that the sheriff's department has been run. And you have the exact same office manager who's been there for the last 3 sheriffs. Nobody else comes in and takes her position, because she's the only one that knows how to run the sheriff's department. You know what I'm saying? So they keep her.
Yeah, what a mess. John, to you, continuing on with these graphic images being circulated among the deputies and who knows who else. The question is, why did you send this to these persons who you supervise? The answer, I thought it was funny. And you wrote, and I am looking at 2040. You wrote, I was trying to be respectful, but that is funny. Was you referencing the image that you sent? Yes, is the question. What kind of example do you think that you were setting for the folks working under you by engaging in this kind of conversation with your sheriff's deputies? Did those communications that we just looked through, did those violate any of the Letcher County Sheriff's Department policies that we reviewed earlier? Yes. Which ones? Conduct. So, John, couple things here. He's admitting, some level of guilt. But again, he's being, publicly shamed now in a deposition that he knew was going to be made public, for basically being a horrible boss, being an untrained sheriff, sending, lewd and lascivious photos around while he's married and he's got this daughter. Again, I mean, this just seems to be a place, and I mean this with all due respect to all the citizens of Whitesburg and Letcher County, that the powers that be are really corrupt. Isn't that what we're finding out here? You're muted, John. I'm sorry.
Yes, I think that's exactly what we're seeing. And to pick up on what Elizabeth said, the prior sheriffs did set him up to fail. First and foremost, they didn't send him off for the proper training.
Yeah.
And then he inherited a sheriff's department that had no policies in place and no training to put the proper policies in place. So now that's no excuse. You run for the job, you're supposed to do the job. You're supposed to go out and learn how to do the job. But I will get back to, as you said before, he sees everything slipping away in this deposition as these questions get into more and more detail, and as he realizes the attorney who's asking him the questions knows more and more. So his client is able to tell that attorney things that when he asks the sheriff knows are true. So he knows that that woman is talking to that attorney, and the cat is out of the bag. And then we get to the point of, where does he just think this whole thing is falling apart, and I'll just take everyone down with me, or I'll try to, maybe he gets paranoid and thinks everybody colluded with her and they're setting him up to get him out of the picture so things can go back to normal. But something clicked in his head that tripped him over to think this isn't just going to be a civil suit where we pay, it would be go in and offer her money, give her a non-disclosure agreement, and then everything stays quiet. And internally, there are some adjustments that are made. Maybe some people are forced out, et cetera. But that would not be an unusual resolution. He didn't see that, apparently, my speculation, but clearly his actions show he did not see that as the path that was going to be what they move forward on.
Wow. Squeaky wheel here. John, I'm coming back to you on this. Seems to me that if Mickey Stines felt justified in this shooting, he'd want everyone to know why he did it. We have the exact opposite here. A really good point. His defense team will come up with something outrageous. You're a defense attorney. How, if you were hypothetically hired to be his legal counsel, I mean, how do you approach this? And do you agree with this comment from Squeaky Wheel?
Well, I think that he clearly had a traumatic break in his mental health that contributed, and I would want to find out how much that aspect played into it. There was also the comment he made as he was being taken into custody, they're trying to kidnap my wife and daughter. Now, again, this may be paranoia. It may have been something that they thought they were trying to silence him or get rid of him and pin everything on him. But there are obviously things that he is perceiving in his mind that are driving this shooting. There's also that aspect, as I mentioned before, he didn't go in with his gun drawn. He did not go in, gun drawn, gun ablazing, to shoot that judge. There was something in his head that said, maybe there's an answer that I can get that will cool the temperature down and I can leave here. But something he heard during that exchange was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I want to know how close he was to that. Was it that single one straw away? Is that how much pressure and tension that he was experiencing from these revelations that are coming out in the deposition and soon to be public, and the fear that the deputy who had been sentenced to prison might be cooperating or giving more information? That's where I would start looking. How much of a mental break did he experience, and how can we show that?
Yeah, in general, on the heels of that, and then we'll get Elizabeth to weigh in on this. This kind of came out of left field in the deposition. There's talk about something known as California encephalitis, and I don't think we have this graphic, so I'm just going to read it here. The attorney says, just for the record, he and I don't know how long it was that he suffers from California encephalitis. So when he is under stress, sometimes it causes more issues. The other attorney says, I've never heard of that. The other attorney says it's something that you get from tick bites, basically. Other attorney, well, if we need to take more breaks, I'll be happy to do that. And if you don't know the answer, and then it gets cut off. And that is time to say that you don't know. Let me talk to him for a second. We'll be right back. So this issue, General Mark, of a potential tick bite that causes problems with his mental state, this came in obviously in the deposition before the murder. But if I am John Tompkins and I'm a criminal defense attorney, I am latching onto that, using this in my defense to say, hey, he had some sort of mental lapse. What do you do with this as an attorney general if they come at you and say he's got California encephalitis, which, by the way, we looked up. It seems rather benign. It doesn't seem like an overly serious thing. But what do you do to kind of bat this down if the defense does indeed bring it in?
Yeah, that's a new one to me. I'm not familiar with California encephalitis, and if you're under stress, it causes some issues. I don't know exactly what that means. At the preliminary hearing, we saw the beginning of the defense starting to go down the mental health path, and they have since requested an evaluation for his criminal responsibility. They're going to go ahead and do one for competency, which are two different things. This California encephalitis, it's interesting, but it doesn't, in my opinion, do any more than kind of raise alarm bells as a prosecutor that you're likely to see, which we did at the prelim, some type of mental health defense. And they went back and forth on whose expert had to go first and so forth and so on. But nothing about this encephalitis thing, which the attorney seems to be saying might cause him some issues about testifying in a deposition, in my opinion, would rise to the level of affecting competence to stand trial or his sanity at the time of the offense, which in Kentucky, they when they talk about that, they're talking about criminal responsibility. But it's did you know right from wrong? So having some issues under stress is, to me, that's not really a big deal. But the prosecutors in this case are clearly ready and anticipating a mental health defense, if for no other reason than to try to knock this down from murder 1 to a manslaughter 2 in Kentucky, which is a big cut in time.
Yeah. Nick Brennan here, who is former Leo, says that the Good Old Boys Club is the bane of law enforcement. Keep stories like these hidden. Nan R here, ticks can cause encephalitis. I had encephalitis, not California, that I know of. And I'm assuming the CA is California, which I think it is, that I know of. And it didn't cause any mental health issues. Odd excuse. So there you go from someone who's had it. John, I got to go back to you on that. So this obviously happened. And by the way, John's got to catch a flight. So John, whenever you have to bounce, you just give us a wave, and I don't want you to miss your flight. However, by the way, you're brave to fly these days with all these, I don't know what's going on in the skies, but that's a whole other story, and you will be fine. However, in that entire thing that I just rambled upon, I basically just lost my train of thought. But this notion that he's got this California encephalitis, you've got to be salivating as a defense attorney. This happened pre-murder, so it's on the record. It's not like an excuse after the fact. What do you do with that as a criminal defense attorney?
First, I tread very lightly, investigate very deeply, because there's a legitimate mental health issue that is not tied to brain dysfunction. So a brain abnormality that affects your mental health is different than a mental health crisis. Usually you don't look at something that's physically wrong with the brain when you talk about mental health crisis. You look at sudden heat or being overcome by paranoia. This encephalitis, it's really risky to raise a physical condition. So he's in a stressful job, as Mark said before, and he's fit for duty, whatever that means in that county. So the immediate pushback would be, well, it wasn't that big a deal. He performed in his stressful job. 2, how much of a treatment history does he have for encephalitis? Because it's really dangerous to come out the day after you committed a crime and say, oh, I've got this illness that explains it. And that does not look good to juries, and it is just a punching bag defense for a good prosecutor. So I would tread very lightly, but responsibly investigate to see if it might have contributed, might have lowered his threshold. But before I brought it up and incorporated it into the defense, I would want a reputable doctor who knew what they were talking about to tell me that was possible.
Now look, you're already being quoted. Tread lightly, investigate deeply. Attorney John Tompkins, who will live on forever, in perpetuity. Elizabeth, I got to ask you, I mean, there's some other things here going on. The sheriff in the deposition says he first heard of the allegations against Deputy Ben Fields. He's the one who was convicted of essaying women in the judge's chamber, that he heard about it from a reporter. Mickey Stines did, not from internal reports. And it says the sheriff was unaware that Chris Triplett reported sexual misconduct allegations to the department in December 2021. Tell us who Chris Triplett is. And are you surprised that the sheriff finds this out basically in the paper or wherever else?
I don't know if I actually believe that or not, to be honest with you, because apparently this is Jennifer Hill's boyfriend. So this would be the girl that passed away from the OD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other victim of Ben Fields. So it was her boyfriend. And according to him, in what he told the Kentucky Attorney General's office, and it's in the civil suit, that he called down there and one of the females answered the phone. He said something to him over the phone about it. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think they hung up on him. So then he went down there in person. He tried to give the complaint that Ben was doing this to his girlfriend in person. And somehow Mickey wasn't there. So he left. And he says that he was pulled over 4 times later that day, 3 or 4 later that day by different officers. One guy pulled him over in a red truck that had lights and stuff. Then another deputy, I think it was supposed to be, I'm not going to say any names, but it was a male deputy and a female deputy pulled him over. And each time they pulled him over this day, they told him to keep his mouth shut. That they had heard there was all kinds of talk going through the sheriff's office about what he was trying to say, and they were telling him to stop it right then. And so I don't see how, if 3 or 4 deputies are going out to shut him up, that Mickey didn't know about it. You know, I just don't see him doing that and not at least telling Mickey about it.
Yeah,
but
the way you're putting it makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
I want to take this completely in a different place.
Please.
About Mickey and his defense. Well, one of the things, if you remember what his defense attorney said, the very last interview that he gave, that I saw anyway, he said that Mickey had, when they brought up the paranoid body cam footage of him leaving the courthouse that day, his own attorney said he had every right to fear for his life. And that he was afraid that he had said something wrong in that deposition, or that he was going to say something wrong in this case, or that he had already said something wrong. When I found out that the lawyer was at the deposition, he had 2 lawyers at the deposition. He had one that was representing him in his official capacity as sheriff, and he had another one that's one of the good old boys in his circle that was sitting right there with him, representing him as an individual in his individual.
And that person has quite a reputation, from what I understand.
Yep, he sure does. And so that makes sense to me. That maybe he had said something wrong or said something that had implicated. And that's what his lawyer said. He was afraid that he was going to say something, or that he already had said something, because he was put in a very delicate position being around so much bad misconduct.
Yeah. Let me go back to Elizabeth on this one. No disrespect, but Mickey Stines does not seem like the sharpest crayon in the box. Does anyone think he was being set up? Do you think he was being set up, and that's why he was so paranoid? What say you, Elizabeth Jones?
Well, you got to remember that Mickey was Judge Mullins's bailiff for over 10 years before he became sheriff. So he has been in that courthouse for a very, very long time. They've had weekly poker parties. They've had all this this has been like a family. You know how the mafia is. They're a family.
Yeah. Speaking of families, Elizabeth, let me go here from Violet. What did Mickey Stines' wife know that she asked him to leave the marital home 2-ish weeks before this happened? Do we know?
Well, I'm not convinced that she kicked him out. Now, I know that that's been reported by national networks, but I think from what I have been told, he left on his own because of the paranoia, or I don't know if it was the paranoia, but the fear that he had that somebody was going to do something to him or his family. What I have been told was that he was staying away from home on his own accord.
Yeah.
So that makes it a little different.
Yeah. And one more for Elizabeth, then I'm going to get back to the attorneys here. Didn't Stines call his daughter on both his phone? These are the reports that came out before he calls him on his phone and the judge's phone. Has there been any confirmation or anything further on that? Because I'm not really sure how that fits in now. It did originally when you thought maybe the judge was doing something nefarious with the sheriff's daughter. That's what I think everyone was thinking at the beginning. But what about this? Have we learned anything more about these calls, if they even were made?
I said it from the very beginning. If you remember, I think that's just a red herring. I think that doesn't have anything to do with what the cause of this is. But that's just my opinion too.
Yeah. So General, back to you. The investigation process is also discussed in this deposition. Turns out the sheriff did not conduct any sort of internal investigation into this Deputy Ben Fields. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to give John one more question, so he doesn't. Let me go to John then, because he's got to catch his flight. So John, the sheriff, it turns out, did not conduct an internal investigation into this deputy who's then convicted. The case is referred to the Kentucky State Police. They declined to investigate, citing a conflict of interest. So then the Attorney General's office takes over the investigation. What is like the protocol here? And we can get this from Mark too, because he's more on the inside. But John, what's the protocol? I mean, should the sheriff have conducted an internal investigation, or was it right of him to refer to the Kentucky State Police at that point?
Well, the answer is yes to both. He should have done an internal for the personnel situation, just for the HR aspect, but not necessarily for the criminal aspect, because once you know that misconduct is going on in your department, there may be other witnesses in your department, and you start having multiple people who need to have their testimony separated and kept apart, and in effect, you just cannot conduct that investigation on the criminal side. It's a little surprising the Kentucky State Police wouldn't take it over. They could have assigned somebody from a farther away post. But the Attorney General's office at state level does have investigators for that too, official misconduct, those kinds of things. The Attorney General in Indiana doesn't get involved in criminal prosecutions, but they can refer things for criminal prosecution. But yes, he should have done an internal to terminate him and to see how deep the misconduct was. But in doing that, he's really disqualifying himself from the separate criminal investigation that has to take place.
And
I'd like to know what this polygrapher is doing. He's responsible for doing the lie detector and making a recommendation on hiring. I mean, he should be in a lawsuit too. What's his standard for saying hireable?
Yeah, exactly. I know, John, you got to catch a flight. And it sounds like
and I'm sorry, I do have to go.
I'm going to sound like an old Jewish mother. Text me when you land safely.
All right, I need time to pack my chute.
All right. Have a safe flight.
Take care, all.
Take care. Lisa Christopher, thank you for that. And then Terry's got this comment. Mickey had a future, a daughter graduating this coming May in a few months, family time without drama in the future. So why would he throw that out the window? The judge said we need to talk privately. Another great point, Elizabeth. I think you were going to make a comment as well. So the floor is yours.
I don't remember what I was going to say
okay.
now.
So let me, I'm glad it's not just me then. There's also, by the way, Mark, not just like memes, but there's references to strip clubs in this deposition. The sheriff does admit his behavior is horrible. There's never any official reprimands or documentation filed about any of this. Now, it gets more interesting. There are additional reports and missed complaints. Breonna Cornett's mother, Christy Fultz, and I have to tell you, I don't know who they are. So, Elizabeth, who are these people?
Well, if you read that deposition, I think what they were saying was that one of the ladies, I don't know, Joel, go ahead.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know.
No, well, this case is like a real tangled web here. But Mark, so there's a woman named Breonna Cornett who we have to find out who she is, and her mother, this woman Christy Fultz, Fultz, she allegedly reports issues to the sheriff about Deputy Ben Fields, but the sheriff denies recalling such a report. Robbie Kinser and Judge Kraft, I don't know who either of them are other than a judge, had knowledge of allegations, but also failed to report them sooner, later apologizing for the delay. Stacey Yates, another person, reported witnessing inappropriate discussions in drug court, but was allegedly told to stay quiet. Doesn't matter so much. Hello, Oak Park. Thank you for being here. Any relation to Bob? Let us know. General Mark, who these people are aside, these are law enforcement officials and judges who are literally just ignoring complaints here, which is, again, why we're calling this lawless Letcher County. What sort of, I guess, what sorts of things do you have in place in Tennessee, and you're in a rural area, 5 different counties, to prevent this sort of thing from this old boys club just ignoring real serious allegations? Do you have something there, and are you surprised by this?
I am surprised. Maybe I shouldn't be. It's Kentucky, this area of Kentucky, and Elizabeth knows better than I do, but from what I understand, it's extremely rural, much more rural than my area. We're right outside of Memphis. So I think this is a new definition of rural to me, probably. Very tight knit, very close knit, and you can see from the deposition that there is quite a bit of this, and I hate to use the term "good old boy," but guys having fun at each other's expense, engaging in juvenile kind of silly behavior. I've seen some of that myself. That's not uncommon in law enforcement. They work together under a lot of stress, difficult job, doesn't pay a lot, and they will blow off some steam here and there as they can. But to get to your question, we have a number of things in Tennessee. People can make anonymous complaints or reports to the state comptroller's office for fraud, waste, or abuse. The TBI, the equivalent of the Kentucky State Police, has a hotline that people can call. So there are avenues, at least in Tennessee, to get around this kind of tight-knit community where nobody really wants to call out somebody else's bad behavior. I can't speak to what Kentucky has in place, but I have to imagine that there were other avenues. And my guess is these folks just didn't want to go on the record complaining about the local sheriff in such a small community.
Yeah. It was earlier in the show. A bunch of people are here from Whitesburg. If you are from Whitesburg or the very close vicinity, please feel free to email me. I'd love for you to survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. You could even use this as a platform to get your, I'm sure you guys are all frustrated with this level of what appears to be serious corruption. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
You got to remember too. So Edison Banks was our Commonwealth attorney. Before Edison Banks passed away about 2 months after Mickey shot Kevin, but he was our Commonwealth attorney for over 20 years. In the last, I don't know how many years, it's been since Mickey was sheriff. So it's just been within the last couple of years. So Edison Banks got sick. Well, he went and got him an in-home, live-in medical aid that was a little young, early 20s. Well, she ended up getting pulled over 2 or 3 times driving his official attorney vehicle. You know, it's got the little license plate on the back that says official. Well, she got pulled over carrying heroin, meth, you name it, she had it. She was carrying so many drugs, and she did not go to jail. She didn't, nothing happened to her. They ended up putting an article in the newspaper about it, and Mickey, so they Kentucky Attorney General's office appointed another county's Commonwealth attorney, special prosecutor for that case for her, for one of the cases for her. She had 2 or 3 or 4, and in Letcher and Pike County. And that prosecutor, the Bell County prosecutor, wouldn't even answer the phone. Mickey sent off one of the substances to the lab that she was caught with, and it came back as the F word that's unaliving everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she had it all. And that prosecutor would not even put in that she was even going to take it to court. Like, they never prosecuted that case. So this is Edison Banks. He says that somebody recommended her to him. She apparently had a really bad drug habit, but somewhere these drugs are coming from his aid, that's his living aid that he ended up giving his power of attorney to. And she's fighting for his estate right now that he's passed away. These are the kinds of things that you can get away with in Letcher County. And that's not right. That's not right.
No.
And that brings in drug trafficking. And we're also looking at some sex trafficking if it really goes down that path.
And look, Elizabeth, I think, is indicative of the good people of Letcher County in Kentucky. And again, this needs to be looked into, the corruption. I mean, if there's any silver lining in the death of this judge in a horrific manner, it'll be that they fix some of the corruption. Ryan Adams, who is here from Letcher County, from Whitesburg, the epicenter, no, he wasn't being set up about Mickey Stines. He was Judge Mullins' court bailiff for 14 years. There is nothing which took place which would have been a surprise. Mickey has always been very paranoid in his thoughts. I love getting sort of the inside scoop for the people who live there. Just one other thing here. My iPad's about to die, so I'm going to plug that in so I don't lose it. But General Mark, to you, this guy, I'm going to bring this guy up. I did some looking around, some sniffing around when I heard about this case, because I'm like, how deep is the corruption here? And in 2008, this is in a different area of Kentucky. Former Judge Tim Nolan from Newport, Kentucky, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for human trafficking. He made a plea deal, but tried to back out of it at the last minute. And I think it was something very similar. And then there's another guy, a Kentucky attorney. Florence attorney is serving a prison time for his involvement in a human trafficking ring and is now banned from practicing law. Robert Poole pleaded guilty to 7 counts of promoting human trafficking in Boone and Benton counties in 2022. Poole was sentenced to 8 years in prison along with a fine and 9 protection orders. On Tuesday, the state of Ohio, where he also practiced, permanently disbarred Poole for unethical conduct following a similar ruling in Kentucky. Now, if you go to any state, and by the way, this is an important paragraph. According to prosecutors, Nolan traded heroin for sex and forced victims to have sex with his friends. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and the state suspended his law license. Now, you go into any state, including my home state of New Jersey, certainly Florida, you're going to see corruption. I mean, we just, we see it all the time. But it appears that judges, you don't always hear about judges. Let's put it that way. It appears that there are judges and attorneys, and there are other ones that I came across that are being accused of very similar acts to what Sheriff Deputy Ben Fields was accused of. And if we're just being completely transparent, what many people think perhaps Sheriff Mickey Stines and perhaps even Judge Mullins were involved in. So it just seems like an absolute mess, Mark, because you've got the upper echelons of both the legal world, that you know, the legal profession in terms of judges and lawyers and law enforcement, who are the head of this proverbial snake. I mean, what do you do here?
So the examples you just posted up and discussed, those are pretty good examples. Well, they're great examples of individuals taking advantage of their positions. Judge Nolan clearly was taking, and these folks, judges, defense attorneys, I'm reluctant to say prosecutors because I like to think we would never do that. But when you're in these positions and the people that you're dealing with are disadvantaged, maybe probably have substance abuse issues, that Judge Nolan is handing out drugs in exchange for sex and trafficking. He's in a position to take advantage of people who are at a disadvantage to the judge or at a disadvantage to the attorney. That does happen. We had one of those in West Tennessee some 20 years ago, a circuit court judge who was having sex with people who were his defendants before him in court. And he ended up fleeing to Arkansas and was federally prosecuted and spent the rest of his life in prison. So these things do pop up occasionally. They're rare in the big scheme of the criminal justice system. 99% of our judges and prosecutors and defense lawyers do their jobs without this kind of abuse. But, and the more rural you get, I think there are fewer guardrails in place to try to prevent this kind of behavior. So it probably makes it a little bit easier to take advantage of people.
Yeah. The three flamingos here, we're going to wind up in a second, get some final thoughts. I am from Letcher County. Please email me, survivingsurvivor@gmail.com. I am from Letcher County and was close to Judge Mullins. I am floored at the level of education that Mickey seemed to have. Not a very smart man. Sad for the ones that was under his hand. I agree with you. Three flamingos. I'm curious to hear from you, to hear whether or not you think that maybe, just maybe, this went all the way up to the judge himself, that maybe he was up to no good. So let me know. I'm curious to hear. Boone County, someone's saying, is one of the richest counties in Kentucky. I did not know. What I do know, General Mark Davidson, he is an active district attorney general in 5 rural counties of Tennessee. Mark, obviously just your closing thoughts, but talking about all this, does it make you, sort of wonder about your own 5 rural counties? Do you need to make sure that all your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and that, things are in place, protections are in place, so this sort of thing does not happen?
Do that every day. Part of the job, and we do encounter misconduct and we prosecute it. We don't care what your position is or who you are. If we've got the evidence and you're engaged in misconduct, then that's going to be an issue. So, unfortunately in this case, whatever happened here came to a head in such a way that it was a murder of a judge by a sheriff. And we're trying to unwind this backwards. And it's going to be very interesting to watch the next few months of this case as more comes out and you hear more discovery and see more motions and hearings and see the lawyers kind of navigating what their respective positions are.
Yeah. Look at this, Dr. Von Decay. I love this. I'd love to see a collaboration between Sweet Tater, Elizabeth's mom, and Carm. We should do that. We should do a 4-person show. Your mom and my mom. My mom's a licensed therapist, so she's definitely going to have a take on this. This is a disturbing comment. Lived in Carter, Kentucky. My 15-year-old brother was unalived at a party. Cops there, something involved. My whole family was threatened to stop asking questions, so we moved away. Never solved and won't be. Kentucky's so corrupt. It's got to stop. I mean, it has got to stop. Elizabeth, obviously, I want to get your final thoughts, but first, have the families, and I asked this last time, of either Judge Kevin Mullins or Sheriff Mickey Stines, have they made any public comments since this all happened? No.
No, the judge and his wife just lived like 2 miles up the road from where I live, so I pass their house every day. There have been a vehicle there every now and again, but there hasn't been anybody live in that house since Judge was killed.
Do we know the next court date?
No, I don't know the next court date yet. I don't think they've set that yet. But I just want to add one more on the fire for you there. So Perry County is our neighboring county. It's 30 miles from Whitesburg, not even 30 miles from Whitesburg. The Commonwealth Attorney in Hazard last year, the year before, was investigated by the FBI for a lot of sex crimes that he was committing against the people that he was supposed to be prosecuting. He was a drug addict. He was having them bring him drugs. He was having them meet him in his vehicle. One man even went to the press and gave his own victim statement saying, what was I supposed to do? This prosecutor was making him do smack stuff with him. He said, what was I supposed to do? He could send me back to prison. This man only got charged with honest services fraud. And this was the FBI that came in and did this investigation. Where was the sodomy? Where was the R word? None of that did he get charged with. And he only got 54 months in prison.
I mean, General Mark, she brings up a sad but important point. I mean, she's talking about a prosecutor in a state now. What would you do if you found out one of your prosecutors under you is involved in, first of all, illegal behavior, but specifically forcing people into SEX? I mean, what kind of action would you take there?
I would ask for law enforcement to investigate it, and I would recuse myself from that investigation. And I would probably reach out to in Tennessee, the TBI. They're our state agency that is, we consider them to be a third party. They investigate our officer-involved shootings so that departments don't have to investigate their own people. And so that's the outside agency I would call in to take a look at some kind of allegation like that to determine if there's any merit in it. Now, I would, as we discussed before, probably do an internal investigation of my own for HR purposes to figure out, do I need to discipline or fire this person, and what merit do I see? But I would be aware that I should not be trying to do the criminal side of it.
Yeah. I'd like to fire someone just to be able to say I fired someone. I've never had that.
No,
it's not fun. That's a dangerous thing, right, Mark?
It's no fun. It's no fun.
Well,
it's dangerous. Real quick, and Elizabeth, you're going to get the final word. Erica Little here, Jenkins, Kentucky here. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but didn't Judge Mullins have close ties with a local businessman who is also accused of the things people were accusing Mullins of doing too? I don't know who that is. Erica, if you want to email me, survivingthesurvivor@gmail. It appears Elizabeth does. Elizabeth, I need to get your final word, and also your final comments here. But again, like, Elizabeth is an example of the good people of the state of Kentucky and the good people of Letcher County. They deserve much better than this. So kudos to Elizabeth for reporting on, not sort of, but actually reporting on this. And I was going to say, kind of blowing the whistle here, albeit the whistle is being blown slowly because information is just trickling out. But Elizabeth, your final thoughts, and this has got to get fixed.
The man that Miss Erica is speaking of here was Judge Mullins' college roommate back in the college days. And he ended up being charged with 44 counts of sexually abusing 2 children, one under 12 and one under 16. And he ended up getting a 5-year plea bargain with a special sentencing recommendation that he would be given 5 years to serve on house arrest and work release, working right across the street from the Letcher County High School.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are the kinds of things that we're seeing. I just told you that the FBI came in and did this investigation with Scott Blair, the Commonwealth attorney. You've got Edison Banks doing whatever. You've got all of this stuff going on. The reason why you're not seeing anybody come forward, because nothing's gonna happen. People are scared. You have several, like maybe 4, 5, 6 unsolved murders in this county that are still unsolved. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows what it's related to. People are scared. Some of my very best friends, they're afraid to even put a like on my shows, but they watch them every single night, and every time they see me or talk to me, they're glad that we have this show now. The only thing that separates me from a whole lot of other people, there really ain't much. I'm a nobody, but I went to school and I have a master's degree in criminal justice that I've had for about 5 years, and I never was able to use it. I was never able to get my foot in the door anywhere in this county. And so I have just a little bit more knowledge about the system and the process and the way. I don't have the experience, but I have the education. And so it gives me a little bit of it gives me a little bit more knowledge to talk about this stuff, and a whole lot of other people might not have that same level of knowledge,
Yeah, and I got to ask Mark. I know we thought that was his last comment, but there's a lot of people in the chat, Mark, echoing Elizabeth's comments that nothing's going to be done, and that's why no one's coming forward because they're too scared. If you're a citizen of Letcher County or anywhere in Kentucky or any state, and you feel that this is going on, it's a real problem because you're too afraid about the fallout and about the retaliation. What is your advice to these people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough situation in a really, really small rural place like that. Here in Tennessee, I work a lot with our local legislators, and we do a lot to change laws and try to make things better for people who are in positions like that where they don't feel like there's anything that they can do or anything that can be done or anybody they can trust. I think you're seeing from the Kentucky Attorney General's office in this case, they appear to be very competent and doing a good job prosecuting this case. I would like to think that people in Letcher County might feel like they could reach outside the county to people at the state level. But I'm not that familiar. Elizabeth seems to be thinking most people don't think that's a real option.
The Kentucky Attorney General's office is the one that gave Ben 6 months.
Well, and I kind of would like to know the inside scoop on that plea arrangement. I don't really understand that. That's an awfully generous sentence. And I don't understand the recusal by the Kentucky State Police from one of these investigations when it seems to me it's very easy just to bring in agents from a different part of the state. That's pretty routine. So I don't really know what's going on there. So there seems like there's quite a bit to kind of unearth here.
Yeah. By the way, this should be my mom's last name, Swearingen. But Swearingen.
Swearingen.
But it's like people who don't have money, they can't fight. It doesn't matter if you're right. The system will swallow you whole. That might be the sad truth. So, Elizabeth, let me ask you the same question I just asked Mark as my final question. You've got to have friends, people yourself included, who kind of look over their shoulder because they're worried about retaliation or worse. What is your advice to your neighbors who feel stuck right now?
Stay home. Stay home. Stay out of trouble. I go to ball games and my kids' ball games, and I stay home and I work. So I'm not too scared for myself. My mom is terrified for me. But I'm not at the bars. I'm not out drinking. I'm not doing the things that put me at risk of getting pulled over and being in some kind of a confrontation with police. So I don't know, honestly.
Yeah, you're doing incredible work. If you don't know, you know now. Elizabeth Jones, host of Hillbilly Crime, she's really been on top of this case from the beginning. And then you got Mark Davidson, who's an active district attorney general. That's why we call him the general for 5 rural counties in Tennessee. And I'm going to talk to Elizabeth offline. We'll definitely do a show if she's down to do it with her mom and my mom. I think it'll be hilarious, good YouTube, and also insightful. So we will plan on that. We will see you tomorrow night. We're doing Maddie Soto, another difficult case. Sadly, it is true, Lindsay. I am still going. 3rd show of the day. I can't keep doing this, or I won't last, period, very long. So we'll pick up tomorrow, 7 o'clock, Maddie Soto, an unbelievably disturbing case. And then Thursday, we're back with the Alexander brothers. If you don't know, 3 brothers here in Miami who also were big real estate guys and had a big company in New York, Miami, accused of now R-ing and S-ing up to 60 women. And they come from unbelievable privilege. And it looks like the hammer is about to fall on them. We will see you tomorrow night. Love you, America. Love you, Tennessee. Love you, Letcher County. And let's get some things fixed in Kentucky. We'll see you. Guys, stick around 1 second.